Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good to see you all. I'll just give it a minute here. Excuse me. Hi, everyone. We're just waiting for everyone to join here. We'll get started in just a second. And if everyone could mute, please, that'd be great. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Hi, everyone. Good to see you.
Recording in progress.
I'm Jenn White, if we haven't met, and I'm the founder and executive director of Arise Immigration Services. If you're unfamiliar with us, we have a dual mission. So we provide pro bono legal services to immigrants here in Pittsburgh. We focus on asylum cases, and we provide training and mentoring to advocates around the country as we all work on cases together. I'm just going to mute. If you could all mute, please, that'd be great because there's feedback. And so while we work on cases, we're, of course, driven by deadlines and the intensity of the casework. So it can be hard to do a deep dive into topics that we're doing in this training session. So tonight's topic is trauma-informed interviewing, which is a super important topic. There's a lot of materials out there, as I think you all know, but it's kind of a hard topic to sort of like find your style in. But there's so much that we can learn to make like a really big difference before we start working with clients. So a couple housekeeping things first. If you need a certificate of attendance for this training tonight, just shoot me an email. I'm putting my email in the chat and I'll send it to you. So for example, if you're applying for DOJ accreditation, you should get the certificate because that could help your application. I'm also putting in the chat, I created a Google Doc just with some tips that I've kind of discovered along the way of doing this work. So I'll put that in the chat as well. You're welcome to just copy and paste that, use it for your own reference. Okay, so for tonight, in terms of the agenda, we're going to do a mock interview with Jenn Bulcock playing the interviewer, and I'll play an actual client based on a real case that I worked a while ago. I think it was about 9 years ago. So we're trying to keep this as authentic as possible. So Jenn knows virtually nothing about the client. She'll know as much as you know when I give you a little bit of background to keep this real, because it's just hard to get these kind of experiences where you can observe. And hopefully it'll make you feel more comfortable going into it yourself. So the reason why I asked Jenn to be the interviewer is because she has a really great perspective given all of her experience and like the nature of her career. So I love introducing Jenn. She's had like a super interdisciplinary, like courageous career. Basically, she was a tenured professor, and then that wasn't enough for her. She needed more. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jenn. And so she went back to school, got an MSW after having earned numerous degrees prior to that. Got her MSW at Penn, and she's now a licensed social worker. And she's a supervisor through Penn's Legal Clinics. So she does a whole bunch of different advocacy type things there. So what's unique about Jenn is that she has a lot of knowledge, like in terms of mental health, social work. She's done legal advocacy, and she's also been a professor, so she can explain these things that she'll kind of be acting out tonight. So that's Jenn, our interviewer. So what we'll do is we'll do like maybe 20, 30 minutes of this mock interview. And then Jenn will give you some tips from a mental health perspective, and I'll give you some tips from a legal perspective. And they're interrelated, as you'll see. And then we'll have Q&A at the end. So depending on how long the interview goes, I would anticipate this will end between 8 and 8:30. A couple of cautions before we get started. The material we'll cover tonight is quite disturbing. It's traumatic material. We'll be covering topics like sexual assault, domestic violence, other forms of violence. This was a really sad case, as most asylum cases are. All asylum cases are. And another caution is that this interview is a challenging interview. Like, this was one of the hardest series of interviews I ever did in my career. So this is not at all representative of what you actually see in general when you're working with asylum seekers. It's just a better teaching moment to use a hard interview. So in terms of like your background, this client, I'm playing Maria, we'll call her Maria. We're going to jump into about the third interview with her. So Jenn is the legal advocate trying to help her write her own affidavit. So Jenn is trying to elicit the information that's legally relevant to write down her story. And she's applying for asylum, so there's a whole lot of information that we need, right? So we're diving into that third-ish interview because we've already gone through some of the rapport building, some of the background information about her life in Peru, where she's from. And now we're diving in deeper to those really hard topics that I think a lot of us get nervous about, you know, the trauma stuff. So background on Maria. She's from Peru, outside of Lima. She was raised by her grandmother. She, at a young age, started helping her grandmother cook to sell the food to make money. That's how they lived. She was basically like tracked down, stalked by this guy named Jairo, starting when she was a young teenager. Age is kind of, she doesn't know exactly how old she was when that started. But this guy was just stalking her, following her around, eventually followed the same pattern that we tend to see in a lot of cases like this. He claimed her as his own, like his woman is what he called her, and then forced her into a relationship with him through a series of threats, through violence, and through threatening her family relationships. So when she was a teenager, age is unknown, he forced her to live with him. And then we know, based on like the intake information, that there was a lot of violence. She became pregnant multiple times. Don't have a lot of details on that yet. And that ultimately became so bad that she fled to the United States with her one child, who at this point in time is about a year and a half. And now she's applying for asylum because she fears that if she goes back, she will have no recourse. Like he'll follow through on his threats to kill her. So I'm being kind of vague for a reason. Like this is the kind of information you're given like in an intake. And this sort of like fact pattern is super common. So at this point in the series, like the idea is to get some more detail, right, about this, the things that actually caused her to flee her country. So with that, Jenn, I'll turn it over to you and I will play Maria.
Hi, everyone. I'll just say one or two things before I get started. One, I'm going to do real, like very brief rapport building. I would spend probably 10 minutes rapport building with a client, even if it was the third session, just because we're going to do very traumatic material. But given that we only have 20 to 30 minutes tonight to actually do the mock interview, I'm going to move pretty quickly. Just so that we can have more time. So don't take this as a how-to on how to build rapport, because admittedly, it's going to be poor rapport building just for the sake of time. The other thing is I'm one person. There's multiple ways to do trauma-informed interviewing. There are multiple successful and trauma-sensitive ways to elicit information from clients. But as you do this work, you'll develop your own personality and figure out what works for you. So if there's something that I do that you're like, oh, I could never do it, or I would never phrase it that way, that's okay. This is one way to get it done. But there are plenty of other ways that are just as successful. They're just different based on personality and possibly even training. Okay. So I will jump in with Maria then. Hi, Maria, how are you today? I know we're meeting virtually, so before we get going and before we say anything, I just want to make sure, are you in a place where you feel comfortable talking with me today, or do you feel like you need to move to somewhere else?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay, I just want to make sure that like children or partners or that no one's around that would hear anything that might make you nervous.
My daughter might come in, but she's little, she won't understand.
Okay. Just so you know, I am at my office. There is nobody that can hear us right now. I have a sound machine on at my door, so nobody should be able to overhear the conversation that we're having. I'm alone in my office. Nobody else is around. So I just want you to know that everything we talk about today is going to be completely confidential and nobody else will be able to hear our conversation.
Okay.
Okay. How have things been since we last met?
I'm fine.
Yeah, how is your daughter doing?
She's good. She's with my friend right now. She's outside. She might come in.
Yeah, okay. She's what, 1.5 now?
She's about 1.5.
Okay. Any new things that have happened, new things she can do, say, any exciting moments from the past week?
I think she's having problems with her eyes because she rubs them a lot. And I took her to the doctor, and the doctor was concerned about the size of her eyes, like they bulge a little bit. So that has me kind of concerned.
Okay, does the doctor have a plan for you in terms of what to do, or do you maybe want to talk a little bit later about different resources that we might be able to connect you to?
I don't know, but I will figure it out. Sometimes I don't like to go to the doctor with my
Okay.
child, but I will figure it out.
Okay, well, that's totally fine, and let me know if there's anything I can do to support you.
Okay.
Okay. Last week we had talked a little bit about your background, and we had talked about the fact that based on your asylum claim that we'd have to have some discussion about your life in Peru and specifically your relationship with Jairo, because that's going to be our primary argument for why you need to stay in the United States and not return to Peru. So this discussion might be difficult at times for you. I want to reassure you that whatever you say, I'm not going to judge you. It's just me and you. Feel free to tell me whatever you can. If there's things that you're not ready to talk about yet, that's okay. We can come back to them later if they're important to your case. But most importantly, let me know if you need to take a break, if you need a breather, if you need to walk away for a sec. I'm happy to stop so that we can do this in the way that makes you most comfortable. How does that sound?
Okay.
Okay. Do you feel comfortable getting right into talking about Hyro, or is there anything else that you would like to talk about first?
I'll try. I don't really know why we have to talk about it, but I'll try.
Okay. I know a little bit about your case from what we talked about before, and the intake paperwork, and I know that this is really hard for you to discuss, but when we make our claim to the United States government, unfortunately, the government needs to know what happened to you and why you were harmed to the point that the United States should say, okay, we should keep her here because if she goes back home, she'll be hurt again. So even though it may seem obvious to you based on what happened with Hyro that you have an asylum claim, unfortunately, the government isn't as understanding. So some of my questions may seem stupid or even annoying, but I promise you everything that we're doing is based on what it is that we need to make the best legal claim for you. Does that make sense?
So yeah, I have to explain why I left.
Yeah, unfortunately. And I know that's not easy to do. And I know it's very private for you. And having to like tell it to me and then have it put down on a piece of paper for a judge to read is very uncomfortable. But unfortunately, this is our best shot at getting you asylum. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Um, just to like start off, can you tell me a little bit about like how you and Hyro met, what your relationship was like? Like you can start anywhere that you want to. I don't need it in a particular order. But what do you think is most important for us to kind of get out to make your claim?
So I met him on my way to school.
Okay. And when you were going to school, what grade were you in? About how old were you?
School is different in Peru,
Okay.
so I think I was maybe like 13 or 14 or 15,
Okay.
but the grades are different there, so I don't know.
Okay. And was he somebody that attended school with you?
He was older. He might not have, I don't even know if he went to school, but he
Okay.
wasn't in my school.
Okay. Who instigated the relationship? You, him, mutual friends? How did that happen?
I didn't want to be with any man.
Okay, so did he approach you in a romantic or sexual way?
So I walked to school and I just saw him. He was just there.
Okay, did he do anything? Did he make contact with you?
Yeah, so I would walk to school with like my cousins, neighbors, and he would just be there, like standing in the bushes. It was weird.
Mhm,
And he'd try to talk to all of us, and he would say to me, like, "Hey, pretty lady."
mhm,
And it made me really uncomfortable. I was young, I didn't understand. I didn't want a boyfriend, I didn't want a man in my life.
mhm. And you feel like his attention was focused on you rather than your other friends?
Yeah, because he would stare at me.
Okay, and that made you uncomfortable?
Yeah, I didn't like it, but I had to go to school, like, I had to walk the road to go to school, and then he was there.
So there was like no way for you to avoid him.
Yeah, and some days I wouldn't go to school. I'd stay with my grandma, but if I was going to go to school, I would probably see him on the way.
Okay, when you stayed home, did you stay home because of him?
Yeah, so I was young, but I understood that women are less than. I understood that, and I would stay home to avoid him.
So correct me, or let me know if I'm hearing you correctly. It sounds like he kind of put himself in your path a lot and was intimidating when you saw him to the point that you didn't want to go to school because you didn't want to see him. And because he seemed to have interest in you above everybody else, you were nervous about the fact that he might try to have a romantic relationship with you or force himself on you or something like that. Am I accurately understanding what you're telling me?
Yes.
Okay. Did it ever escalate beyond him just creeping around on your way to school?
Yeah, so it would also happen on my way home from school on that same walk home. Um, and eventually he got me to go out with him to his home. And then where I come from, the woman is like belonging to the man. So eventually I became his and we were in a home together with his family.
Okay, so that covers a lot, and I really appreciate you kind of explaining to me the way things work in Peru so that I better understand. Um, when you say he finally got you to go to his house with him, do you mean that he convinced you, or did he do something with physical force or something like that?
I don't know, I don't really understand.
So, when you went to his home for the first time, what did he do to convince you to go with him, or did he not?
I don't really know. I just went with him when he asked so many times.
So, like, he wore you down and finally you threw up your hands and said, okay, fine, I'll go.
Yeah, the walks to school um were just becoming scary for me. I thought that maybe I should just do what he said.
In the hopes that things would change if you made him happy.
Well, because women do what men ask them to do. Um, that's what it's like in my country, and that's what my grandmother did with my grandfather.
Okay. So you felt like you had no other choice. Okay. Did people in your life, like your grandmother, encourage you to like give in and go with him to his house, or you just decided that you couldn't hold it off anymore?
Yeah, so my grandmother always would say, like, you're gonna find a man You're
Mhm.
gonna grow up, or maybe when you're young, you're gonna find a man.
Okay. Um, when you went to his house for the first time, were you able to leave or were you forced to stay?
I don't know.
Do you not know because you don't remember or things just kind of have blurred for you?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Can you tell me what things you do remember about your relationship with him?
He's the reason why I had to leave.
Okay. What was it that made you decide that you should come to the United States?
My daughter.
Okay. Was there anything in particular that made you want to leave with her at that point in time?
Yeah, so my daughter belongs to Hiro.
Okay.
Um, and he had said that he would kill both of us. And so there was a bus that was headed out of Peru up through all the way to Texas. And so I just decided to get on that bus.
I can only imagine how terrifying that was for you. And I'm glad that you found your way here. And I'm sorry that that was part of your experience. Um, and your daughter is very lucky to have a mom like you to protect her. Um, can you tell me anything about the days leading up to Hiro making such a significant threat to you?
Um, well, he beat me, and those beatings became worse, and they were really bad when I was pregnant.
Okay.
Um, but that's what happens in Peru, and I saw it happen to my grandmother.
Mhm.
But when I knew that there was a bus out, I just decided that even though it was a dangerous journey out, it was dangerous for me to live there too.
So you felt like it was the better option to flee because even though you didn't know perhaps what that future would hold, you were convinced that the future you had in Peru was not a good one.
Well, he had already killed one of my babies, so I didn't want him to kill the second one.
I'm so sorry to hear that. I can only imagine how painful that was for you. Uh,
Yeah, I don't like to talk about it.
I can don't feel like you have to tell me everything today or that you need to tell me explicit details. That in and of itself is a lot of information for me and for your case. Um, if you don't mind me asking, it sounds like you had carried one pregnancy to term with your daughter, and that he had taken at least one child from you. Um, did he blame you for the pregnancies?
Yeah, so he thought that the baby and me, we were just his belongings. That's what he said. So he could do with us what he did with his shoes that he wore. We were just like something that he owned, something that he bought, or something that belonged to him.
Mhm. So, if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like he treated you like property. That's what you're saying when you say like a belonging, like his shoes or something like that. Does that mean that you think that he enjoyed the way that he acted towards you and your children?
I don't know.
Okay. Is it something that you feel was encouraged by your community for him to act that way?
He got away with it. There was no punishment for him.
Okay, when you say he got away with it, um, did you ever have the chance to tell anyone or contact police?
Yeah, I went to the police and I reported it, and they said there's nothing we can do. They never even talked to him about it.
Okay.
And And so I went back and it was worse than it was before because he knew that I went there because a neighbor saw me going and then told him where I was going and what happened.
Okay. So it sounds like your community was doing nothing to protect you. And even when you went to the police and let them know what was happening, they were also unwilling to protect you.
Because it's normal. It's just normal.
Right. And so even though he was doing these terrible things, nobody cared.
Yeah, and you wouldn't understand because you're not from where I'm from. It's very different. Women are like animals. That is what we are like. We're like the goat in the backyard. That's what we're like. So I didn't believe that and I didn't want to take that. So that's why, because I have a daughter who's a girl, I left.
Okay, so it sounds like you not only escaped for yourself, but also to prevent your daughter from having to go through what you went through. I'm asking these questions, and you're certainly correct. I don't understand what you've been through. And things are very different between Peru and the United States. I'm asking questions about going to the police or going to neighbors because one of the things that the government is going to want to know is if you were to return to Peru, would there be any way for you to relocate somewhere in the country and be protected? So, like, would the police protect you? Would neighbors protect you, etc.? And so, it's good information for me to know that even having gone to the police, nothing was done. Your neighbor ratted you out. All of those things help make a stronger case for you.
Okay.
Okay. And again, I'm sorry that we have to go through all of this. But unfortunately, there are specific things we have to get to for the government to approve your claim. And so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I'll just tell them what I'm telling you. I tell you everything.
Right. And that's great. And when it comes to you having to do an interview, we'll talk about the best way for you to talk about these things. But for now, we're just trying to get it down. We'll write what's called an affidavit for you, which will go to the asylum office with your application. And you'll be able to go through and kind of approve what is said in the affidavit because it's supposed to be your story and come from you.
Yes.
Okay. Are you okay to continue talking for a little bit longer?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. If you ever need a break, just let me know.
Okay.
Okay. So can you tell me, um, you said that you were maybe 13, 14, 15 when Hyro initially started harassing you. And then you were eventually taken to his home. How many months, years, weeks did you spend with him at his house before you came to the United States?
To live with him?
Yeah.
Maybe a year, maybe two, maybe three. I don't know.
Okay. Were you, when you lived with him, did you have any access to the outside world or was it just you and him?
Um, but I kept going to school for a time.
So he would let you out of the house to go to school.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you get to complete school?
No, so I then started helping his mom prepare food so we could sell it. They did like the same thing my grandma did.
Okay.
And then I was just in the house all the time with his family, and his family was just like him.
Oh, so the family supported the relationship as it was and treated you poorly as well.
Yeah, they just thought I was his.
Okay. Um, did he, aside from working or being somewhere surrounded by the family, were you allowed to have contact with your own family or friends from school?
Yeah, like I'd go back and see my grandma, and she was happy that I was with someone and that I would have children. And yeah,
So it sounds like everybody supported the relationship despite the fact that it was misery for you.
I don't really know what that means.
Um, so like you would see your grandma was happy that you had a man, that you were having children. And even though you were experiencing a lot of pain and you were being threatened, that was normal, so everybody was okay with the relationship as it existed.
Yeah, everyone was okay.
Okay. So like even if you were to go to your grandmother and tell her what happened, there would like she wouldn't help you get out of the relationship.
No, because she had the same thing with my grandfather.
Okay, so she had the same type of arrangement where she became his property against her will and was controlled by him.
Yeah, the only reason why I changed is because I gave birth to a little girl.
Okay. Um, did you have friends your same age that went through similar situations?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so this is very common. Do you know if there are any cases that would have been documented in the media or anything like that? And I know, like you said, it's normal where you're from, but it helps for your case if there's like any famous case that's happened that we would be able to find like news clippings of that could help strengthen your case as well.
I don't know. I wouldn't, I didn't, I never read like the newspaper.
Okay. Well, that's okay. We can look. We don't need to you don't need to supply that. Just if you knew of something, it would have been helpful. Okay. Um, is there anything else you can tell me about your relationship with Hyro? Were there ever any good times?
Yeah, like when we started, it was better. It got worse.
Okay. When you say better, do you mean that, well, I guess what do you mean by better? How is it better?
Like he would take me out to dinner when I first started living with him.
Okay. So there was some he would do some nice things for you when you first started living with him.
Yeah, like he'd take me out to dinner. He would like pull the chair out if
Mhm.
I was gonna sit down. But then I got pregnant for the first time, and then that was, there weren't really good times.
Okay. Do you know why your first pregnancy um set him off somehow? Did he not want children?
He used to tell me that I was getting really fat and I wasn't pretty anymore.
Okay. So it was more about you and your body than it was about the child.
And he said that he would kill the baby and that the baby belonged to him, it wasn't mine.
Okay. And he followed through on that threat, it sounds like at least once.
Yeah, and I didn't even want to get pregnant. I didn't want to sleep with him. I didn't want any of it. I didn't even want to be there.
Okay. So it sounds like he forced you into sexual relations with him and then got you pregnant and then got mad at you because you were pregnant. Okay. Um, that's really hard. I'm sorry that you were in that situation and that there is no one to help you get out of it. That's extremely difficult, and I'm sorry to hear that. Um, as things got worse for you, did the violence against you get worse?
When I was pregnant, that first time, that's when it got the worst compared to what it had been.
Okay. Um, when you talk about it being the worst, were you ever allowed to be seen by a doctor or a nurse or have any type of medical care?
Yeah, when he caused a miscarriage, I had to go to the hospital. My friend took me to the hospital.
Okay. Were there other times where he hurt you where you weren't allowed to get medical attention?
Well, he wouldn't have let me. I had to sneak out.
Okay, so even the time you had a miscarriage, you had to sneak out to have your friend take you.
Yeah, I was bleeding for a whole day. And then when he left for work, that's when I snuck out.
I'm so sorry that you had to experience that. That must have been terrifying for you.
Yeah, he attacked my stomach and he did what he wanted to do. He said he didn't want the baby, so he got rid of the baby, and then I went to the hospital.
Okay. What were things like when you returned from the hospital with him?
It was the same, except that he blamed me because he said that I got rid of the baby.
Okay, so no matter what you did, it was your fault then, in his mind.
Yeah, everything was always blamed on me.
Okay. Okay. Um, this may seem like a silly question. Um, but if you were to return to Peru, what do you think would happen? Would he be able to find you quickly?
Well, I'd have nowhere to go.
Nowhere to go in Peru, you mean?
Yeah, like where would I stay? Where would I go?
Is your grandmother still in Peru?
Yeah, but he knows where she lives. She's right down the street from him.
Okay, even so, and like I'm not suggesting this is what should happen, but these are questions the government is going to want answers to, right? Um, if you were to be brought back to Peru, is it possible that you could start a life in another town or another neighborhood or another city? Or do you think that he would be able to find you no matter where you went?
I think I couldn't I couldn't pay any bills on my, like, where would I stay?
Okay, so you wouldn't have the ability to support yourself.
Yes.
Um, and that's because of your status as a woman in Peru?
Well, I have a child, so do I work? Do I take my child to work with me?
Okay. So there would essentially be no support system for you.
Because I could live with my grandmother. I love my grandmother, but then he would find me and I think he would kill me. And I think he'd kill my daughter.
Okay. And I'm assuming that like if you were to leave your daughter with your grandmother, he would try to use the daughter against you as well.
I think he would do to my daughter what he's done to me
Okay. Has he attempted to have any contact with you since you left?
on Facebook.
Okay. Has he been harassing you on Facebook?
He sent me messages, but I deleted my account.
Okay, so you don't have access to the account anymore.
He said he was going to come to the United States and find me.
Has he ever made good on that promise?
I don't know where he is.
Okay, so you have no idea. Has he bothered your grandmother or anybody else that you know?
He's gone to her house to ask where I am. He threw a pot of soup at her door and
Okay.
he asked where I was.
Does your grandmother know where you are?
She knows I'm in the United States.
But not exactly where you are.
She wouldn't know what Pennsylvania is. She just
Okay.
knows that I'm up in America.
Okay. Um, so it seems like even though you've left, he's still been trying to get in contact with you, been asking your family about you, still trying to kind of scare you and keep control of you.
Yes.
Are there any other ways that he's tried to contact you? I'm just asking because if we had further documentation of the harassment continuing, that can help your case as well.
No.
No? Okay. Um, has he ever inquired or attempted to support your daughter in any way?
I don't know what that means.
So has he ever tried to find out things about your daughter, like where she is, how she's doing, anything along those lines?
When?
Since you've left Peru while you've been in the United States.
Yeah, that was part of the Facebook messages he sent me.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit more about what the content of the messages was?
I know they were about my daughter, Michelle. And he wanted to know like when I was coming back with her,
Okay.
and he said that she belongs to him.
Okay. If you did he make any specific threats against her?
What do you mean by threat?
Did he threaten to hurt her or kidnap her or do anything to harm her in any way?
He said he'd come up here and find her, and I know what that means.
I'm assuming it means he would attempt to kill her.
Or take her back.
Okay. And all of this primarily to hurt you, not because he wants to take care of her.
I don't know.
Okay. When you were in Peru, did he ever show any affection or interest in Michelle?
He was glad that he had a child sometimes, but he also said that he never wanted a child and this wasn't his plan.
Okay.
And he would call me a whore because we had a child.
Okay. So it sounds like he was abusive with his words as well as physically.
Yeah, he's not a kind man.
Okay. So he's just pretty much mean to you and uses your daughter against you, not because he actually wants to be a good father.
That he thinks that Michelle is like his belonging.
Right. Do you think that he would beat her if he got her back?
Yes, I do.
Did he ever harm her while you were still in Peru?
He would throw her down when she was just a baby.
When you say throw her down, do you mean like drop her, or can you just tell me a little bit more about that?
Like when she was crying, when she was a little baby, he would just throw her on the couch if he got frustrated because she would cry and cry and cry and not stop. So he would just throw her on the couch. That's why I went to the bus that one day and I decided to leave.
Okay, it sounds like you kind of just one day decided to leave without any planning. You just kind of saw a chance and you took it.
Yeah, I had heard about the bus before, but when I saw that, when I saw my daughter lying on the couch and there was nothing I could do, that's when I decided.
You needed to save her. I'm very sorry you had to go through that. And I think you're an incredible mom and protector for your child, and that you were able to do that for her. And I'm sorry for everything that you've experienced.
Hey, Jen, I think that's probably a good starting
I was
stopping.
just gonna.
Okay. Great. So hopefully that was challenging for you in the way it was for me.
That was very
Because I was trying
challenging.
hard. I mean,
Well done
awful
at being
story,
challenging.
obviously.
Yeah,
Incredible, inspirational woman,
yeah.
but hard interview, like hard topics and tough to get her to talk, obviously, for good reason. So Jen, so at the end, I can explain a little more about what happened with her case,
Yeah.
or I can do that now, but I'll turn it over to you, Jen, for whatever you want to debrief on with from a mental health perspective.
Yeah, so I have some notes that are just general notes that I'll talk about. But I also just want to, in that particular interview, Jen did a very good job being a difficult Maria. And you'll notice that I jumped around a lot. Um, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, when you ask clients about traumatic material, you're not going to traumatize them just by asking. But if you push too hard, you can traumatize them. So you'll notice I would try a few times to kind of get a little bit more information about things. And if it wasn't successful, I would try to move to something else or try to prompt her to volunteer something that she was willing to talk about. And that's because I was mindful of the fact that I didn't want to push too hard. And traumatize her by pushing too hard. So even though it might seem and feel scattered, that's very intentional. And also at the beginning, I made the mistake of asking a lot of like bifurcated questions like, did you do this or did you do that? That was because she was giving me very little. So I was trying to get some basic information. But then you'll notice I switched to, well, can you tell me a little bit more about that? When you say that he threw her down, what did that mean? What did that look like? You tend to get a lot more information with open-ended questions, but when you have a client that's kind of clammed up, sometimes you need to ask bifurcated questions just to be able to get some information to be able to kind of just know what territory that you're standing on, right? Because like Jen said, I knew nothing about this case coming into it, so I was learning everything as you guys were, and so it's really difficult. Plus, a lot of the times, You can go in with a nice, pretty script of all of these questions that you're going to ask, but listening to the client is the most important because oftentimes they tell you things that you don't know to ask about, right? Like, I never would have asked, did he try to kill one of your children? Right? Like, that came up organically in conversation and is something that will actually be very important for the asylum application. Right. And so trying not to be too rigid in terms of what you're asking can be very important because sometimes you get your best information by kind of letting the client guide things. Also know that this is our first time getting into the traumatic content. So I was less willing to kind of push things to try to get specific things to like meet the different elements of asylum. I was just trying to get like a general lay of the land there. If this was like our third or fourth conversation, I would have been a lot more targeted and asked a lot more questions specific to the criteria for asylum. I hope that makes sense. And I'm happy to answer questions about that. But just general things, these are not specific to this interview, but the way I think about doing these types of interviews. You'll notice I did the confidentiality piece at the beginning, especially when you're working online. It's really important for them to know that they have a confidential space, that there's not like an office mate behind your computer screen that's listening to every word. Sometimes I wear headphones so that it's obvious that nobody else can hear us. I also ask about people in the house because a lot of times, for example, with parents, they will censor themselves because they don't want their kids to overhear. For a recent psych evaluation that I did, before having the psych evaluation, I asked the client if they had a private place where like she could talk about anything and everything. And she decided to do the interview in her car because she didn't want her children to overhear what had happened to her. Right? Like, the car isn't the ideal space, but it was the only space she had available to her that actually gave her privacy. So having those kinds of conversations, I think, is really important. If I were meeting with her in person, I would pay attention to her physical comfort, like which chair do you want to sit in the office? Like, are there tissues there? If they're jackhammering at your office that day, try to find another space to meet, like just being mindful of the environment that you're in. Many times you'll be working with an interpreter in these cases, which makes the rhythm of the interview go a lot differently. Introducing an interpreter brings up different issues. I know there's a whole session on interpreters in a couple weeks, so I won't spend too much on this, but just take into account norms that might impact what they're willing to tell you based on who the interpreter is. However, don't make assumptions, right? Ask them, do you prefer a man or a woman? Does it matter if they are from a specific religious group? Does it matter if they're from your village? Like, ask those questions. Also, be upfront with the interpreter about what you're discussing. You might sometimes work with organizations where like you call a number and you get an interpreter. It's really unfair to launch into a discussion about sexual assault and domestic violence with an interpreter that has no preparation for that conversation. Also check in with the interpreter at the end of the conversation to make sure they're doing okay. Because a lot of times, like, it's hard to hear that story. Imagine being the one who has to put it in the words of another language using first person pronouns, right? I was raped. My child was killed. That is very hard for interpreters to do. So check in with your interpreters and make sure they're doing okay. Interview structure, make sure you spend some time rapport building. Like I said, it wasn't very well done in this because I was trying purposely to move through it quickly. Begin with basic information that's less traumatic. If you have like housekeeping items, things like that to start with. Ease into the traumatic content. You'll notice that like I wasn't like, so when did he beat you? Right? It was more like, tell me about the relationship. Like, how did you meet? Tell me about, how you went to his house, so that you're easing into the content rather than just jumping into it. And then also, we didn't get a chance to do this because obviously we cut the interview down, but don't send somebody into the world with their trauma like all over the place. You want to end the conversation that you have by what we call as mental health professionals, like containment, right? You want to help them put the emotions back in the box before they leave your office. And that could be something as simple as, Do you want to do some breathing exercises with me? That will fall flat with some clients and they'll be like, what do you mean? A lot of times talking about their children. What are you doing this afternoon? Did you see the new movie? Like, part of the rapport building is knowing what information you can use to switch them to going out into the world. I also like to ask my clients, what are they doing after the meeting? So I know if they're going to be alone for a long period of time, if they're going to be driving, like, just so that I can kind of figure out if there's going to be any possible issues after they leave the office. You'll notice at various points during the interview, especially when Maria was telling me, like, you don't understand, like, it's different where I'm from, that I had to explain, like, I understand that these may seem like dumb questions. I apologize for the barking if you can hear it. These may be dumb questions, but this is what the government is going to want. This is why I'm asking you this information, so that it doesn't seem like I'm just asking to ask, and that there's like a very instrumental reason for me to ask. You'll notice I let her know that, like, you don't need to tell me everything in this meeting. We can do things later. Told her that she could not answer questions. She could take breaks. We could, revisit things. Give your client as much autonomy over the meeting as possible, because with victims of trauma, by definition, their boundaries have been violated. So allowing them to kind of erect boundaries and have autonomy over what's happening is a way to, like, empower them and make them feel more comfortable. Like I said, asking about trauma, you're not going to traumatize the client. Forcing them will traumatize them. You'll notice that we started off chronological and then switched up halfway through to jumping around. Let them tell the story in whatever manner is most comfortable, rather than trying to put it in a chronological narrative, because for a lot of people, that's just not the way it is in their head, right? One of the things that trauma does is it kind of puts holes in your memory, makes it hard for you to remember things when they happened, how they happened, etc. So take the information as it comes to you. Also, if they can't recall information, that might be because they literally have no access to it. For their own kind of self-protection, their brain might have guarded that information, so they might not be able to tell you, right? So like when Jenn said, I don't know how I got to his house, it just kind of happened. I'm wondering if there was some type of traumatic incident that happened, like if he abducted her, if he raped her, that led to that, and she literally doesn't have access to it, or she just might not want to tell me, right? So trying to think through those things. And the last things that I'll say, in terms of protecting yourself, when I have really traumatic content that I know I need to address with clients, I use what I call protective scheduling. So I give myself time before and after, even if it's just a half an hour, so that I can kind of prepare myself, because you don't want to be running from one meeting to this meeting, right? Like, that's not good for you. That's not good for the client. And being able to just like sit and process after a meeting like this is really, really important, because you don't know how that trauma is going to land with you, and you might not know right away. And running to the next thing on your agenda is just going to like push it down until it pops up later on, right? So try to protect yourself and your time. Also know what triggers you. If you know that talking about sexual assault or domestic violence is a trigger for you because of your own history, because of someone you care about, maybe it's time for you to tap in your partner who doesn't have that history, that might be able to do, or at least not do a better job, but have an easier time with that interview. And then always identify positive coping mechanisms, and know what you need, right? For me, I know that I need quiet. I know that I need some time to myself. And I also know that for me to handle my emotions in an interview like this, I need to have 8 hours of sleep the night before. So know what you need to be able to successfully like survive that interview. And I mean that in terms of like your best well-being, so that you can be there for the client, so the client doesn't have to take care of you. I feel like I've been talking forever, so I'm going to stop talking and hand it over to Jenn, but I'm happy to answer questions about anything later on.
Super helpful. Thanks, Jenn. And one comment before we open up for questions for Jenn, because I've gotten this question a lot from folks who are newer to interviewing. You'll notice that Jenn, because I wasn't talking, Jenn would talk more, right? And so she'd ask more like detailed close-ended questions, and even questions that indicated she understood that this was gender motivated, right? I'm sure you caught that. A lot of people are leery of doing that because they feel like they're coaching the client, right? They almost feel like it's unethical. But when you have a client like Maria, I think that's a smart move from a rapport building perspective. You just have to be careful about what you put in the affidavit, right? Because you obviously don't put your words in, you put her words in. But I think in my experience, that's been helpful with a client that's so guarded and so reluctant to give information to kind of help spur them along. Of course, there's a line, right? You don't want to like feed them what to say. But when you can do country conditions research and understand that, for example, gender motivated violence is a pervasive problem in a particular country, I think it's appropriate and effective to kind of go along with it, like you saw Jenn do. So that's, of course, a balance. Okay, so questions for Jenn. Feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat. See? Okay, here's one in the chat, Jenn. Is it generally easier or more difficult to build rapport in person or remotely when dealing with trauma?
Honestly, it depends on the client. And I can tell you that a lot of the research that's come after the pandemic about, because like a lot of therapists have shifted to online therapy, most of the research shows that there's really no difference. The most important thing is the relationship between the client and the therapist or the counselor, more than anything else. I've successfully built rapport with clients over Zoom. I've successfully done it in person. And having been a college therapist for a year and worked both remotely and in person with the same student, some people are more willing to talk on Zoom than they are when they're right in front of you, right? So it really depends on the client. You might have a client that's like super clammed up in person, but if you do it over Zoom, they'll talk and talk and talk and talk. And that may be because they're more comfortable in their home environment or more comfortable like not being physically watched by somebody in the same room with them. So it really depends on the client and kind of their preferences. But honestly, even like I've had to do interviews just over the phone before, which I hate because I can't see like what's going on. Like I can't see if they're about to cry or things like that. It just really depends on like who the client is and how you connect with them. So I really think it's just what works between the two of you rather than one more than the other. However, I am a big proponent of meeting in person because that's my preference, not because I actually think it's better like clinical practice or anything along those lines.
Leila, I'll get to your, question in a second because I think that's more for me. So Jenn, I have a question for you. You were talking about like keeping things in a box,
Yeah.
like you unveil all these horrific topics and then you kind of want to help the client, leave the interview and go on with their day. So I've been trained to call those grounding questions, like helping the client sort of come back to the present day and hopefully separate from the horrific traumatic experiences they just relived during the interview. Do you have any guidance on that? Like a client like Maria, any thoughts on what kind of grounding questions you would ask?
Maria would be a hard case because
Yeah.
no, because I mean, part of the thing and especially because Jenn's acting the part and not actually, with somebody like Maria, I would be wondering if she's actually like dissociating while we're having the conversation, which is why she's not giving much information because like, yes, she's talking to you, but she's not really in her body experiencing that interview at that moment. And if that's the case, it's really hard to ground somebody like that anyways. But I mean, food and children are normally the two things that you can get people to talk about. That kind of backfired on me at the beginning where I was asking about like milestones for her daughter and she was like, actually, I'm really like nervous about the doctor and whatever. But also it's much easier if you do a good job rapport building and find out things about your clients when you have these types of grounding conversations, it can be things like, oh, last week you told me that you were getting a new playpen for your daughter. Like, have you put that together yet? Does she like the mobile? Like, what type of a theme does it have? Right. And like, even though these seems like really stupid, silly things to be asking after they've told you these horrific stories, it switches their brain gears to thinking about something else that's more positive and very low stakes. Right. And so it's just small things, which is why rapport building is so, so, so important. Because if you don't know those things, it's going to feel very forced and you're going to feel like you don't have a lot to talk about. When all else fails, ask what they're doing later in the day to try to get them grounded. And if somebody's really activated and open to it, you can do like some breathing exercises. There's a simple exercise for grounding that's the five senses. So you ask the person, tell me something that you can feel right now. Tell me something you can hear right now. Tell me something that you can see right now. And you go through the five senses as a way of getting them back into their body and focusing on their body rather than the traumatic content that's in their brain. Right. And so some clients are going to be like, that's total BS. I don't know why you would want to do that with me. Other clients will be very open to it, but you have to kind of know your client to know what's going to work. And I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm hedging, but like that's the honest to God truth in terms of how I approach these things. Rapport building is so, so, so important for so many things.
Great. Here's a good question. Would you make the interview sessions shorter or longer when you know you are dealing with someone who has been through trauma? What is best?
I generally go for, so if you're working with an interpreter, I typically go for 2 to 2.5 hours. Your time basically doubles when you're working with an interpreter. And even though it can feel very limiting with interpreters, one of the things that working with an interpreter does is it what we call titrates the trauma, right? So it comes out slower because you have to wait for the translation or the interpretation to happen. And so it kind of gives them more space along the way. So like 2.5 hours if there's an interpreter, hour and a half, 2 hours if there isn't. More than like 2.5 hours, whether it's an interpretation or not, you're going to be exhausted. They're going to be exhausted. It's going to be a bad experience to push it past that. And you can always end sessions early. If it's something really, really traumatic, you might want to stop after an hour because it's really difficult for the client and they want to. Also, it's completely legitimate for you to be like, I'm losing my stuff right now. I'm in a very dangerous place mentally to continue with this interview and for you to call the interview. That's completely legitimate. And so really kind of, I wouldn't do more than 2 hours without an interpreter, wouldn't do more than like 2.5 with an interpreter. And I'm always happy to cut things short if it's warranted by the content of the conversation.
Okay, kind of related question to like the grounding questions. For the
Yeah.
closing interview with the client, is it helpful to change the subject, such as what you are planning for lunch today or questions regarding daily activities? How can you make a good closing and make the client feel comfortable? So I can tell you what I do, and then Jen, feel free to share your thoughts. So a lot of times, like with a situation like this where it's just heavy, and the client obviously doesn't want to talk, I'll close the interview like at the point where I think the client's had enough or whatever the situation is that causes me to end it or the client ends it. And I'll say, look, I'm really sorry to ask you such horrible questions. I don't want to put you through this. I really want to help you. And this is really the only way I can help you legally. So let's stop for today. What do you have going on the rest of the day? I think that's a helpful question. It's like neutral. And it's not like too abrupt. This particular client really did love her little girl. Like she was kind of evasive at times, didn't want a lot of questions asked about her little girl, but really loved her. So I would ask her about her child sometimes as well. But the whole like getting them to think about, okay, like I have to go back to work now. I also tend to ask like, okay, so this was super stressful, the material we covered. Is there something you can do later on today that will help you just feel better and maybe feel like a little bit of happiness, or maybe will make you laugh or something, depending on the client's personality? You get the drift there. And then I say, will you please do that, even if for no other reason, because I'm asking you to do it. I really just try to encourage them to do it. A lot of times it's like watching a movie or something. But at least like if I can plant the seed, I know sometimes I'm more likely to do something if someone else tells me to, encourages me to do it, like I'll remember it. So anyway, those are some things I do. Your thoughts, Jen?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I do very similar things. Some clients aren't going to want to have small talk. They're just going to want to run away from your office because they've been waiting for this to be done the whole time, and that's totally legit too. If your client is like putting their stuff in their bag, like signaling that they want to leave, just be like, okay, I'll call you to follow up about scheduling for next time. Like, thanks so much. Like, don't try to be like, oh, no. But before you go, we need to do this containment exercise. Some of them are just going to want it to be done, and it's okay for that to happen. Um, and I'm sorry, I don't know why my dog is whining like a dolphin, but it happens. So yeah, no, I wouldn't add much to what Jenn said. I would just take cues from the client in terms of where they are and what will be most productive from them, and try to transition out as softly as you can.
Great. Okay, so a couple more legal questions I'll get to, and then I'll go through just a few points from a legal perspective. Did you ever discuss with Maria the difficulties created to her claim by her reluctance to divulge information? Yes. So I'm pretty direct with clients. So I told her when I couldn't get any details, I said, hey, look, I think your case could be denied because you're not providing the level of detail that we usually see in an asylum case. We should still apply for you, because she was in removal proceedings. She really had nothing to lose by applying. It was a cognizable claim. But yeah, like I mapped it out for her. That didn't change anything. The case was a very bare case in terms of her affidavit and her testimony. I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, I'm really honest with clients. I think that's a part of my ethical responsibility to explain weaknesses so that we can try to remedy them. And so when did I raise this with her? I raised it after several sessions when I realized like this is a pretty like firm pattern, because I felt that that was most appropriate. So Maria's story, what of the areas of asylum? Marielle, I don't know what your question is. Just maybe rephrase it and I'll try to answer it. Can an asylum case be filed if all the work is done remotely? Yes, I've done that multiple times. Okay. I notice you said, I'm sorry that happened to you. Do you find people say or think, why are you sorry you didn't do it? So Jen, feel free to add something here. I just think it's helpful to acknowledge like human suffering, you know? There's so many different ways to do that. I know that there are times when I'm interviewing people, I think they think that I am trying to pry. Like they might not necessarily understand my role. And I really genuinely do feel badly about that. I'm really not trying to cause harm. Like when I think about my role, like that's one of my biggest goals is to do the least amount of harm. So I just mean it. It's sincere coming from me. But if that doesn't work for you, don't use it. Maybe think of another way to acknowledge the suffering, in a way that's sincere from you. But yeah, I've never had any pushback. Usually clients say the same thing, like it's okay, or, I, I made it out, something to that effect.
Yeah, so sure, clients have said things like that before, and my response is, I know I didn't do it, but I still feel bad that these things have happened to you. And I know you're not going to get an apology from the people that did this, and so I just want to honor that. I also use this type of language because you can get into a lot of trouble with some clients by saying, I understand how you must feel, or I understand how bad that was for you, because even if you have been through something similarly traumatic, you don't understand, right? You don't understand exactly what they went through. And most of us haven't gone through what they've been through. And some people will call you on that, right? Especially if there's someone who's defensive. And so out of respect for them and their stories, I do whatever I can, even if it's imperfect, to stay away from language like, I totally understand why you feel that way, or I understand that this must have been terrible for you, right? And so that's why I try to use that language, even though it's imperfect, to avoid saying I understand or something similar.
Right, exactly. I have the same feeling. So I'll go ahead and transition into a couple of legal tips. And if I don't get to your question, just shoot me an email and I'll respond. So one of the reasons why I wanted you to hear a little bit from Maria is because I really want to convey like kind of the baseline good enough, like what is good enough for an asylum case. And of course, every adjudicator is different, so there's not like a pat answer there. But a case like Maria's is winnable, and she did win asylum, even though her affidavit was pretty terrible and her testimony was pretty terrible. The other evidence was strong. So long story short, Hyro had like branded her. So she had scarring on her body. And so we arranged for a physical examination by a doctor through Penn who provided a fantastic medical report for her case, basically saying like her explanation of the persecution is consistent with the injuries we see on her body. It happened, right? So that solves past persecution from a legal perspective. Unfortunately, I set up on 3 separate occasions a mental health evaluation for her to have a report, because I'm sure she had PTSD. I'm sure there were a number of mental health things going on, but she didn't show up for any of them. But anyway, legally, gender-based violence cases are always challenging, but she had some really strong nuggets in there because did you notice how like he called her a whore? Like that's gender motivated language. That kind of stuff is very powerful for an asylum case. Like he was explaining his motivation. He was attacking her because she was a woman. Like that was very clear from what she was able to tell us. And you could see that from some of the things that I said tonight. Like even the fact that he attacked her pregnant body, like it escalated when she was pregnant. Women get pregnant, right? Like there was a lot there to show that he was motivated because she's a woman. So anyway, the whole idea of like what is good enough for a client, you can do a lot to help a client's case, even if they're reluctant to give a lot of detail, like was the case in this situation. She ultimately won. Okay, so when thinking about like what questions to ask, particularly for a client that doesn't want to divulge, I think it is very helpful from a legal perspective to focus on nexus. So that means the reason for the harm, right? So a lot of newer advocates, I think, make the mistake of fixating on past persecution. So in Maria's case, that would mean you fixate on like the beatings, the rapes, the forced miscarriage, like all those horrific traumatic events, right? Focusing on the details, trying to get all of that out into the affidavit and the testimony. I think that's a mistake tactically, and I think it can jeopardize your client's mental health, to be frank. What it tends to be more important is the reason for the harm, okay? And if you think about this, lots of people in the Zoom room right now have suffered what rises to the level of past persecution, right? Lots of people have. Very few, if any, have suffered it on account of one of the 5 protected grounds in a way that would qualify us for asylum, right? Particularly if you've lived in the United States your whole life, because the government can provide some protection. So anyway, my point is that generally speaking, a lot of times adjudicators want to know if past persecution happened, and they want to know enough to like evaluate whether or not the client is credible, but they do not generally need to know like, the full-blown story. They want to know why it happened. And so there's of course exceptions to this. Like I've heard horror stories about some judges and like in the South, specifically immigration judges, who will come out and say like, I don't believe you've been raped. You need to give more detail. I don't believe you. I've heard of that. I've just never seen that myself. Usually they fixate on nexus. So the questions you ask are like, did he say anything when he was beating you? Did you ever see him attack men like he attacked you, right? Because this is gender motivated. She already gave a lot of really helpful nuggets there, with the attack on the pregnant body, with the use of the word whore, I'm a woman, so I belong to him, I'm his property. Like all of that is nexus. That's very powerful evidence through her testimony. So I think that's encouraging when you think of this idea, like what is good enough? She actually gave a lot there, even though it might not have seemed like a lot, because her words were few. So focus on nexus, rather than fixating on past persecution. Let's see, what else do I have here? I think Jenn alluded to this, or she said it explicitly, like, you don't want to push too hard. I've seen a lot of legal advocates do this. I think a lot of folks with perfectionist tendencies are drawn to legal advocacy, and that can serve you very well when you're working with documents and when you're assembling the case, but it doesn't serve us well when working with human beings, particularly those who have suffered trauma. So I would just be careful about not pushing too hard. Like in Maria's case, I really don't think that she would have budged much in terms of giving detail. I don't think she would have. And frankly, there were times where I probably did push a little too hard. And I've learned since then, because we're about 9 years later, that you really have to work with what you're given. And to ask clients point blank, like, okay, do you not want to talk about this? I do not want to cause you harm. I think that's a useful question to ask. You can also reschedule. So it's another thing that I've learned is that, there's the underlying trauma that clients deal with in their countries that causes them to leave. But then there's the horrific stressors they deal with in the United States. So I've noticed that, say you meet with a client and they just had a bad work day because they don't have work authorization, they're paid $2 an hour, right? And they're stressed out of their mind because they can't pay their rent, right? So that could be the reason why they don't want to talk to you. They have more pressing things. So rescheduling can be very, very helpful if you're not dealing with like a 1-year deadline, next week. And I have found that to be helpful, even like adjusting the time of day, like maybe after they're completely done with work, not during their lunch break. So adjusting those things can be helpful. I sort of alluded to this earlier with the expert report from the doctor for Maria, but expert reports are super, super valuable. So there's generally 3 types of expert reports for a case. There's a country conditions expert, there's medical expert like we had for Maria, and then there's mental health. And so ideally for Maria, we would have had a mental health, but she didn't want to go, so we didn't have that. But it basically like makes it easier for your client not to have to hit all the legal elements if you get someone with a lot of credentials to hit those legal elements. And judges just love to quote from expert reports or from their live testimony during trials. If you're at the asylum office, you can't have testimony from an expert, but you can provide an expert report, which is also super useful. So there's so much you can dissect from this kind of case, but the last point I want to leave you with is I think it's very helpful to try to remain as open as possible with cases like this, like with asylum cases specifically, because as much as we can go through trainings and understand like, data related to trauma and its effect on the brain, and like all of us are trying in our own ways, I think, to be like humble enough to really help, and like keep some of our own preferences out of it, just really help the human in front of us. A lot of unexpected things happen. So like with this particular case, I worked it in law school with my now husband, Danny. We were clinic partners. And so at that point, I had a lot of training on like trauma-informed interviewing. I was a social worker before law school. So when we got this case, I assumed I would take the lead just because I had a lot of training, and Danny's a guy. So he was comfortable with that. But what was interesting was I noticed that Maria was a lot more comfortable with Danny. And so I kind of covered our bases in terms of like getting a little bit of the traumatic material covered. So we had that in the affidavit. But then I sat Danny down and I was like, I really think you need to take the lead in this case. Like, she much prefers you. And so he did, and that made things go much better from that point onward. In terms of like the domestic and sexual violence, I kept those issues just because I thought that was important, because that usually works. But everything else, then Danny took the lead, which is not something I've seen since then. Usually clients are really happy. Clients who have suffered this kind of trauma are happy to have a female advocate. They tell me that all the time. But that's what happened and it worked and he did a really great job and I sat in the background. So I say that because weird stuff happens like that we can't predict. I have no idea why that happened. Like other than the fact that Danny's a really peaceful, relaxed guy, maybe that had an effect on her. So it ultimately led to her being granted. So it's getting kind of late, so I want to respect your time. But those are my thoughts in terms of like legal tactics when conducting a trauma-informed interview. Any closing questions? Okay, I see one in the chat. If this Yeah, so email me for a certificate. If the stories of the client you are interviewing resonate with your own personal experiences and they have gone through similar situations, would it be appropriate and beneficial to mention this during the interview to build trust? So I see this as like a boundary question, right? I think it's perfectly appropriate. I've seen a lot of people do that. Everyone has very different boundaries in this line of work. As long as it's ethical, I say go for it. I know I sometimes will share things with clients. Other times if I get like a weird vibe or I feel uncomfortable or whatever, I don't share as much. Yeah, I mean, I'd be careful about sharing things that are like deeply personal. But if like say that you've been through the immigration process in the United States or something to that effect, I think that's really helpful. I've seen a lot of advocates do that. It seems to be effective.
So I will not disagree with you, but give a different perspective. Be
Sure.
really careful with what therapists call use of self and self-disclosure. The situation your client is in having to tell their traumatic story is difficult enough. Sometimes when you self-disclose things, the client, which many of our clients are often in the like caretaking role or are the ones that take care of everybody else from themselves, when you self-disclose, you'll activate like a response in them where they'll feel like they have to take care of you or they don't want to traumatize you or trigger you, right? And so like it can backfire on you sometimes. So I wouldn't self-disclose until you really get a feel for the client. And like telling your whole story would be inappropriate. But if there are points where it like makes sense to say like, you know, I've been through the immigration process in the United States. Like, I know how frustrating it is. Like, I couldn't believe they didn't have forms and languages other than English, and to like share experiences like that. I think that's perfectly fine. But when you give too much detail, you can put yourself in a position where the client is then going to feel like they have to take care of you or they can't share things with you. So you have to be really careful with self-disclosure.
Yeah, that's helpful. Any other questions? Let's see, I think there's, okay. Okay, I think that's it. Jen, thank you so much. Super helpful. Really appreciate your time. And
Happy
thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks for
Hope
being
this
willing
was
to spend
helpful.
an evening with me.
Yeah, hopefully I was evasive enough to be
Oh, you
effective.
were. You were. You did well at being difficult.
Good, I'm glad. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great night. Good to see you all.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.